Opening August, 480 BCE. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, where blood soaked into stone for 3 days and 3 nights, 2 deaths occurred almost at the same time, but with opposite meanings. On one side stood defiance. Leonidas and his 300 warriors fought to the very end. On the other, betrayal. Ephialtes, the man who led the Persian army through a hidden path, trading honor for a handful of gold. But behind that epic tale lies a darker, more disturbing part of history, one that films have never dared to portray. According to ancient records, captured Persian soldiers were not treated as human beings. They were forced to fight each other like wild animals in fire pits, the survivor made to eat the corpses. Some were ordered to bite down on blades until their mouths filled with blood. Others were flayed alive, skin peeled off in strips, then paraded through the camp as a grotesque form of entertainment. The traitor, Ephialtes, was shown no mercy. His arms were tied behind his back, his body dragged over sharp rocks, iron hooks driven through his shoulders, pulled through a crowd howling for revenge. Finally, he was dropped into a vat of boiling bronze, his flesh melting inch by inch, his screams lost in his own choking blood. And on the front lines, Leonidas did not fall as a respected hero. Xerxes, the Persian king, ordered his head cut off, his body nailed to a wooden cross, raised high above the battlefield as a symbol of humiliation. But that very act only ensured Leonidas's name would live forever in human memory. This is no legend, it's historical truth, recorded by Herodotus and echoed across more than 2,000 years. In this chapter, we'll delve into the dark side of glory, the brutal torture of traitors, the agony Spartan warriors endured to become war machines, and the truth behind a heroic saga that wasn't all honor and valor. Because to become immortal, first they had to die in ways no one wants to remember. Let's begin. Sparta, the birthplace of emotionless warriors. Greek winter, snow covers the Taygetus Mountains. Amidst the skin-piercing wind, a newborn lies exposed, naked, silent. This is not abandonment. It is the first test of Spartan life. If the child survives the night, he deserves to become a citizen. If he dies, he simply wasn't strong enough to live. That is the beginning of a life destined for war. In Sparta, every boy from the age of 7 was taken into the agoge, one of the most brutal military training systems in the ancient world. No gentle mothers, no tears, only instructors, whips, and hunger. Spartan children were deliberately starved. They were forced to learn how to steal food, but if they were caught, the punishment wasn't for stealing. It was for getting caught. The penalty? Beaten until they passed out. Some were chained under the sun or hung overnight. In the agoge, weakness was an unforgivable sin. They were made to fight until blood spilled, teeth cracked, or bones broke. If anyone cried from pain, they were punished even more. The Spartan spirit did not allow softness. If you can't endure pain, you don't deserve to live. And to officially cross the line from boy to warrior, a blood ritual began. Cryptia, the boy would be ordered to hunt and kill a helot slave in the night. No reason, no resistance. Just a way to prove he was ruthless enough. That's how Sparta forged machines of war. No tears, no fear, only blades, glory, and death. Leonidas, a king forged in blood and steel. Leonidas was not born to be king. He was the second son in the royal family, with no special privileges beyond any ordinary Spartan boy. From a young age, he lived like every other Spartan male, starved, beaten, and pushed to the edge of human endurance. Leonidas didn't emerge from the agoge with the glory of a prince, but with broken bones, spilled blood, and silent endurance in the face of pain. He believed one thing above all. He who leads must be the one who suffers best. No one could have predicted that one day he would bear the burden of defending Greece from the vast Persian Empire. When Xerxes, ruler of hundreds of thousands, threatened invasion, Sparta's council, caught in politics, forbid the army from marching. But Leonidas didn't wait for a vote. He handpicked 300 royal bodyguards, called it a personal escort, and marched straight to the narrow pass of Thermopylae. Before the battle, he looked into the eyes of his warriors and spoke a line that history would never forget. "Eat well, for tonight we dine in hell." Thermopylae, the gate of hell between mountains and sea. Thermopylae, the name means gate of hell, a narrow pass tucked between mountains and sea, just wide enough for a few dozen men to march shoulder to shoulder. A perfect bottleneck for defense, and the place Leonidas chose to make his stand against the most powerful empire of the age. Here, 300 Spartans, joined by a few thousand allied troops, faced off against hundreds of thousands of Persian soldiers. The odds were 1 against several hundred. But that wasn't what made the air so suffocating. It was death. Death that hung over everything, because every man there knew they were not coming back. Instead of retreating, they formed ranks and built a wall of living shields. The enemy was forced into the tight passage. Wave after wave of Persian soldiers surged forward and fell. Every slash, every thrust was a brutal contest between life and death. By nightfall, the dead were stacked like barricades, and blood soaked into the rocks, painting the pass red. Leonidas wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting for time. Time for the Greek city-states to prepare. And Thermopylae became exactly what its name promised: a gate to hell. Killing machines inside the death struggle. On the first day, the Persian vanguard was swallowed whole. They charged straight into an unbreakable wall, Sparta, the living shield of iron. Corpses piled up, rivers of blood flowed. On the second day, the Persians sent in their elite forces. The result was no different. Inside the narrow pass, the Spartans fought like wild beasts. When their swords broke, they fought with their bare hands. When their shields shattered, they used rocks. The concept of surrender simply did not exist. Captured Persian soldiers were not spared. Some were tied to the front lines as human shields, used to absorb enemy arrows. Others were forced to bite down on blades, a punishment recorded by the historian Herodotus. More brutal still, bodies were impaled and displayed across the battlefield like grim signposts, symbols of the death awaiting every soldier behind them. Sparta didn't just kill, they sowed terror. They didn't fight with strength alone, but with cold, psychological warfare. Torture and punishment. When war lost its humanity, warfare in the ancient world was unlike anything we know today. There were no Geneva Conventions, no humanitarian organizations, and certainly no such thing as prisoners of war. Those who were captured became tools of punishment, symbols of warning, or simply entertainment. In ancient records, many prisoners were mutilated after battle, tongues cut out, eyes gouged, and then released. They wandered, bloodied, and broken like ghosts. Living messages from the victors. Resistance is useless. Submit or suffer the same fate. The Assyrian Empire was notorious for gutting captives alive and burying thousands in mass graves. The Persians, under Darius and Xerxes, were no less cruel. They flayed prisoners alive and nailed their skins to city gates as a warning. And Sparta? The Spartans had their own methods, not more savage, but colder. They didn't scream, didn't mock, didn't gloat. For them, punishment wasn't entertainment. It was psychological warfare. Captured Persian soldiers at Thermopylae were sometimes forced to fight each other like wild animals in fire pits. Those who survived were made to eat corpses, or ordered to strike down their own comrades. Some records describe prisoners being forced to chew on iron blades until blood gushed from their throats, or having their skin peeled off piece by piece and then paraded through camp, symbols of total defeat. The Spartans didn't do this out of hatred. They did it for one reason. Fear is the greatest ally in war. And when morality is gone, war becomes hell without escape. The traitor. A price paid in blood and fire, Ephialtes, a name forever linked with betrayal. He was the man who led the Persians behind Spartan lines, all for a handful of gold and a whisper of power. But in return, he earned a shame that would never be washed away. In Spartan tradition, betrayal wasn't just a crime, it was a death sentence. Not because of honor, but because of survival. A small army lived or died by absolute loyalty. Break one link, and the whole chain collapses. Those who betrayed Sparta, if captured, faced some of the most brutal punishments imaginable. Arms wrenched backwards, dragged by iron hooks, burned alive in boiling bronze, or skinned alive, from neck to toe. There were no trials, no forgiveness. Their deaths were blood-soaked warnings to anyone even thinking of turning their back. In movies, Ephialtes is painted as a pitiful figure, deformed, rejected, misunderstood. But in real history, there was no pity. He was hunted, cursed, and eventually died in agony. A walking curse, punished for trading his comrades' lives for a few more days of his own. One man's life, bought at the cost of eternal damnation in history. The death of Leonidas, symbol and desecration. On the third day of the Battle of Thermopylae, darkness came from behind. The Persian army, guided through the mountain pass by Ephialtes, had fully encircled the Greek position. Knowing there was no escape, Leonidas ordered his allies to retreat. He and his final 300 Spartans chose to stay, to fight with their weapons until their last breath. They didn't fight to win. They fought to die the right way. When Leonidas fell, his body was covered in blood, but his back remained straight. Xerxes, the self-proclaimed Lord of Asia, did not see a defeated man. He saw a symbol that enraged him. Xerxes ordered Leonidas beheaded, his body nailed to a plank, and raised high on a stake in the middle of the battlefield. To the Greeks, desecrating a corpse was a grave sin. They believed the soul could not pass on if the body was defiled. But Xerxes' act did not bring submission. On the contrary, it ignited a fire of resistance across the Greek city-states. Leonidas died, but his death became legend. Aftermath. Blood spilled was not in vain. Thermopylae had fallen. The 300 lay dead. But instead of fear, the Greeks were filled with fury. It was no longer a war for territory. It became a war for honor, for a symbol. From Athens to Corinth to the smallest islands, city-states that once stood divided now joined the same cause. The Greeks crushed the Persian navy at Salamis. Then came Plataea, where Greek warriors used land strategy to shatter Xerxes' battle-hardened army. Leonidas did not live to see it, but his body was brought back to Sparta. It was recovered and laid to rest with the highest honors, amid tears, chants, and eternal oaths. A single spear, a single body, a single mountain pass ignited a revolution. Ancient warfare, glory and hell. Looking back on it all, the final question remains: was war ever truly worth it? We admire Sparta's bravery, we honor their sacrifice, we remember the names of the fallen. But what lies behind those stories? Flesh melting in boiling bronze, children left in the snow to build endurance, corpses strung up as symbols of victory. Ancient warfare had no trace of humanity. It was an age where blood measured loyalty, pain proved courage, and death was the only reward. Some say, without war there would be no heroes. But others ask, without war, would we lose our humanity? Thermopylae was both light and darkness, honor and haunting, legend and hell. The legacy of the 300, dying to become immortal. They died, but they never vanished. The 300 Spartan warriors did not return home, did not bring back victory, and never saw the light of a new day. What they left behind was an immortal symbol, etched in stone, recorded in history, and pulsing in the blood of those who survived. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae today, a modest monument stands against the mountain wind. Not a grand temple, not glittering gold, just a bronze statue bearing the resolute face of Leonidas and a plaque inscribed with a line of ancient verse. Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws. No words of glory, no tales of valor, just a message, as if they had simply done what was expected, to die in order to keep their oath. A symbol of resistance. History has seen countless last stands, but Thermopylae was more than a battle. It was the first spark that burned away fear and ignited a shattered nation into defiance. Their deaths lit the path to future victories at Salamis, Plataea, and Mycale. Their deaths made the invaders retreat. Their deaths made generations stop and bow their heads. When history becomes legend, Hollywood turned them into myth. Films like 300 made Leonidas a giant, the Spartans into superhuman warriors, and war into a dazzling performance. But the truth was far more brutal. They didn't have chiseled bodies. They were hungry, thirsty, shivering from the cold, and exhausted from sleepless nights. Their blades dulled with each swing. Their shields cracked under pressure. Many didn't fall from wounds, but from sheer exhaustion. And they knew. No one was coming. No final act. No miracle. They fought not because they thought they would win, but because they had no other choice. The price of glory. A monument honors them, but blood still clings to the stone. We call them heroes, but few ask who chose them, who decided they must die. Could that sacrifice have been avoided? From childhood, Spartans were taught life exists to serve the state. Personal freedom, personal emotion did not exist. They were not allowed to fear, to cry, or to refuse battle. So was their death a choice or a fate imposed? In the ancient world, honor was a double-edged sword. It made men immortal, but it also left them no way back. Legacy. A question, without an answer. Leonidas did not live to see victory. The 300 did not live to be honored. They never knew that thousands of years later people would still speak their names in history books and films and poetry, but perhaps their greatest legacy is a question. What makes a hero? Is it strength, honor, or the ability to accept death? And can we in the modern world still understand the true value of courage? Conclusion. Thermopylae was where 300 men fell, but also where an unbreakable spirit was born. It was the place where ancient warfare reached the peak of both glory and tragedy. A place where human beings, through their own deaths, transcended oblivion. They no longer breathe, but they have never been silent. Because when death carries an ideal, it is not an end. It is only the beginning.